I have cancer. The system gave me a chance to recover. The condition was to successfully capture my childhood sweetheart, Fu Siheng. But Fu Siheng, who had lost his memory in a car accident, married my cousin. My capture failed. Not only was I unable to recover my health, I also faced the fate of being erased by the system. Later, my childhood sweetheart regained his memory. He was eager to find me. I looked at the countdown displayed on my palm and saw that it had already reached 0. I smiled calmly. I'm sorry, it's too late. At the Star Awards ceremony, Fu Siheng proposed to the actress Lin Wanwen. I was sitting in the audience, watching my cousin accept Fu Siheng's knee on one knee with excitement, and put on the ring. Both the audience and the online fans sent their sincere blessings to the two people hugging on stage. My heart seemed to have stopped beating. The whole person stood still like a lost soul. Tears filled my eyes. They flowed down my cheeks. Ever since the system told me about the romance mission, I have been by Fu Siheng's side every moment. After spending so much time together, I have fallen deeply in love with him. Even after his car accident, I stayed by his bedside and nursed him back to health. Everyone thought I would marry Fu Siheng, but now he has lost his memory. He has even married that cousin who impersonated the result of my hard work. And I have become the butt of everyone's jokes. What irony, what irony. I was staring at the kissing couple on stage. My eyes were red. Suddenly, the voice of the system rang in my head. Host, you did not marry the person you were romanced with as agreed. I will erase you. You have 7 days. Say goodbye to the world. On stage, Fu Siheng took good care of Lin Wanwen. When the host of the evening asked a difficult question, Fu Siheng took the microphone and answered for her. The way they looked deeply into each other's eyes was like a sharp knife that pierced straight into my heart. I clenched my fists hard and tried hard to stop shaking. Reluctantly, I said, okay. When the microphone was handed to Lin Wanwen, she blushed and expressed her deep love for Fu Siheng with excitement. Finally, she suddenly mentioned my name. Siheng and I were able to get together, thanks to my cousin Kai Zia. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't have met Siheng, let alone married him. That day, the superstar Lin Wanwen suddenly proposed that I, an ordinary person, go on stage. I held back the sadness on my face and slowly walked up to the stage. As soon as I reached the stage, Lin Wanwen immediately came over to hug me. Then, she took the microphone and said to me, "Cousin, you will bless me and Siheng, won't you?" Lin Wanwen's words were gentle, but there was a hint of smugness in her tone. Her eyes looked at me provocatively. She did meet Fu Siheng through me. She witnessed the sincere relationship between me and billionaire Fu Siheng before I lost my memory. That cousin who had repeatedly confessed to Fu Siheng, but was rejected my cousin, who therefore harbored a grudge against me. Now she is about to become the Fu family's young mistress. I took the microphone. Words of blessing stuck in my throat. I couldn't say a word. Fu Siheng wasn't very satisfied with my performance. He frowned and told the host to tell me to step down. After the awards ceremony was over, he walked over to me with a rather bad complexion. He asked, "Cousin Kai, do you not want me to marry Wanwen?" He looked at me and I didn't say anything, and laughed contemptuously. "Kai Zia, I heard Wanwen mention it after I recovered my memory. You kept pestering me before I lost my memory. You wanted to be with me, but I rejected you all." He also said, "You were also jealous of me being with Wanwen. You spoke ill of her in front of our relatives, damaging her reputation." Fu Siheng looked at me with a serious expression. "I will soon marry Wanwen. She is the most important person in my heart." Fu Siheng accused me, "If I find out that you have hurt her again, I will never let you off lightly." Hearing his words, I could only face them with a bitter smile. The things he just mentioned, in fact, they were all things that Lin Wanwen had done to me. But now, she is saying that I have hurt her instead. Just then, Lin Wanwen, who had changed into civilian clothes, walked out of the dressing room. As soon as she put her arm around Fu Siheng's arm, Fu Siheng looked at her with loving eyes. These same eyes had looked at me with the same expression. Lin Wanwen looked haughty. In a tone of voice that commanded obedience, she said to me, "Cousin, I'm having my wedding photos taken tomorrow. Why don't you come with me? You always have good taste in things," she said meaningfully. I wanted to say no straight away, but then I thought about what the system had said earlier. I glanced at Fu Siheng. His eyes were a little complicated. Then she quickly looked down and said, "Okay, I'll go. Fu Siheng, you're about to marry someone else. And I, with only 7 days left in my life, still can't let go of you." The next day, I arrived at the bridal shop on time. When I opened the door, Lin Wanwen and Fu Siheng were already waiting for me on the sofa in the VIP room. When Fu Siheng saw me enter, his brows immediately furrowed. He looked me up and down with an unhappy expression on his face. "You're dressed like this in such an upscale place." I looked down at the suit I bought for 50 yuan from a street stall, pretending not to understand the meaning of his words. Is there something wrong? Since my parents died, I've spent all the money I've earned on medical treatment. This is the only new suit I have. Fu Siheng looked me up and down several times, completely ignoring my feelings. He said to Lin Wanwen, "You're right, your cousin really isn't reliable. You said she makes tens of thousands of yuan a month. How come she's still wearing cheap clothes? She must be spending her money in the wrong places. You should spend less time with her in the future." Lin Wanwen leaned on Fu Siheng's shoulder. Pretending to be angry, she said, "Kai Zia is my cousin. I forbid you to speak of her in this way." Her eyes still revealed her inner delight. Lin Wanwen stood up from the sofa, pretending to be very close, took my hand and said, "Cousin, you'll help me put on my wedding dress later." After the heavy curtain was drawn, it immediately separated Fu Siheng's side. Lin Wanwen's sweet smile on her face also disappeared in an instant. She put her hands on her chest, speaking in a low voice, "Cousin, didn't you say that Fu Siheng wouldn't like me? Now that you see that he wants to marry me, aren't you uncomfortable? So what if you have cancer? What about the long hours spent caring for him in the hospital? Now I'm the only one in his heart and eyes." I looked at her calmly and said, "Lin Wanwen, does it make you happy to take someone else's happiness? Even if you marry Fu Siheng, you will still be the one taking someone else's happiness." These words seemed to have struck a nerve in Lin Wanwen. She glared at me angrily. She took off the expensive haute couture wedding dress from the hanger and said coldly to me, "Really? Then I'll let you see for yourself who he really cares about." Lin Wanwen tore the wedding dress with all her might. Then she deliberately fell on the wedding dress display stand. Her eyes were arrogant. She pretended to be scared and shouted, "Cousin, don't hit me." Fu Siheng heard the shout and immediately ran in. "Wanwen, what happened?" Lin Wanwen raised her wrist, pointing to the bruised area. Her eyes glanced at the ruined wedding dress. "Siheng, my wrist hurts a lot. Don't blame your cousin. She didn't mean to ruin my wedding dress, and she didn't mean to push me over." Fu Siheng picked up Lin Wanwen from the floor. He said to me with a stern face, "You apologize to Wanwen right now." I frowned. Watching the man I loved protect another woman, my heart ached. I clenched my fists. My face turned pale. I didn't even touch her. Fu Siheng's face was stern. He looked at Lin Wanwen, who was pretending to be in pain with a heart full of pain. "Wanwen is a kind and good girl. She gave up the invitation to star in a new drama by a famous director. She has been taking care of me in the coma in the hospital ward. Someone like her, how could she falsely accuse you so easily?" Fu Siheng said coldly, "Kai Zia, don't think just because you're Wanwen's cousin, I won't dare to touch you." These words pierced my heart like a knife. I endured the injustice and said, "I'm sorry. I will never apologize to her." Fu Siheng shouted angrily, "You," at this moment, Lin Wanwen in his arms tightly wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered, "Siheng, cousin is my family, please don't hurt her. I'll be sad." Hearing these words, Fu Siheng's gaze on Lin Wanwen became even more tender. "Wanwen, I'm really lucky to have met a good girl like you." Then he looked up at me, his tone cold and hard. "This time I'll let it go." He hugged Lin Wanwen tightly, protecting her in his arms. Then he stood up and said, "Wanwen, don't be afraid. I'll immediately call the personal doctor to come and see you." The figure of Fu Siheng walking away with Lin Wanwen in his arms overlapped with the way I remembered him. I held back the lump in my throat. I remembered that he had protected me like this before. "Fu Siheng, the way you protect another woman really makes me feel bad." I looked down and saw the numbers on my palms slowly change from 7 to 6. I returned home. The house was empty. I was too weak. I curled up on the sofa. I fell asleep. The system that had been in my head for so long still had a conscience. It helped me to relieve the pain in my body. It allowed me to sleep peacefully. As soon as I closed my eyes, memories of the past with Fu Siheng flashed through my dreams like a movie. Fu Siheng transferred to our school in high school. At that time, although he was tall but was very thin, he was an introvert. His family was wealthy. The day after he transferred to our school, he was bullied by the boys in his class. They cornered him at the back of the school building. They poured cold water over his clothes. I saw the expression of helplessness and fear on his face. As I walked by, it softened my heart. I immediately thought of my own experiences when I was a child living with relatives. I felt for him. I told the teacher about it and helped him out of his predicament. Since then, he has kept his distance from me, but when I saw the snacks he had deliberately left on my desk, I immediately understood that this was his way of expressing his gratitude. Sometimes, he would even initiate conversations with me. He helped me solve the maths problems that gave me headaches. After the college entrance exam, we didn't get into the same university. Gradually, we lost touch. Until I was job hunting after graduating from university, I discovered by accident that he was the son of the boss of the company I was about to join. He recognized me performing on stage at the company's annual meeting. Later, we gradually got to know each other. Gradually, we drew closer to each other. That sad night, when my parents died unexpectedly, he stayed by my side. He comforted me softly. Han Wanwen first met Fu Siheng at my parents' funeral. Since then, she has often appeared by Fu Siheng's side. She even confessed to him. Fu Siheng always coldly rejected others. He also said that he already liked someone, but when he suddenly confessed to me, a systematic voice suddenly popped into my head. Host, you are now in the terminal stage of cancer, but if you can successfully make Fu Siheng fall in love with you, the strategy will be successful, and you will recover your health. I thought it was only natural to marry him. Unexpectedly, Fu Siheng had a car accident on the way to the airport, with a tired body, day and night to take care of him. Just as I temporarily left to deal with my parents' funeral, when I returned to the hospital, Han Wanwen suddenly appeared in the ward, and Fu Siheng, who had been in a coma for many days, woke up at this time. I was so excited that tears almost fell. I wanted to throw myself into his arms, but he coldly pushed me away. Then, he gently embraced Han Wanwen in his arms and said, "Who is this strange woman from nowhere? How dare you take advantage of me in front of my fiancé?" Wanwen took care of me day and night in the hospital. I absolutely cannot let her down. I held back my tears. I looked at Fu Siheng painfully. I never thought that the lover who was once close would become so unfamiliar. Although Fu Siheng learned from the doctor that he had lost his memory, he still didn't believe my words. He treated me like a stranger. Instead, he treasured Han Wanwen. I took the family jade bracelet he had given me several times to find him, but every time I got his cold and distant questioning. How did you steal the family heirloom that I gave my daughter-in-law? You think showing me the stolen jade bracelet, I will believe your lies. I already know what kind of person you are from Wanwen. You better get out of here, or I won't be polite. He snatched the jade bracelet. He slammed the door. Suddenly, there was a loud clap of thunder. I stood by the window and watched the shadows of the two of them embracing. My heart felt empty. It was as if everything was over. I was awakened by a loud knock on the door. I opened my eyes. I noticed that the pillow under my head had been wet with the tears I had shed in my sleep. That was the only photo we had together. I had held onto it tightly in my sleep. The knocking at the door outside became more and more urgent. I quickly dried my tears. When I opened the door, Fu Siheng was standing there. His face was cold. He looked as if he was about to lose his temper. He opened his mouth as if to scold me. But when he saw my red and swollen eyes, he froze for a moment. He said in a somewhat awkward tone, "Lady Wanwen doesn't mind that you tore the wedding dress. She's especially looking forward to trying the seafood porridge you made yourself. You bring the porridge over tomorrow. Consider it an apology." I was full of grievances. I said coldly, "Why should I cook porridge for her?" As soon as the words fell, Fu Siheng's face immediately changed. "Kaizia, you've really gone too far. Wanwen is kind-hearted. As long as you deliver a bowl of porridge, she will forgive you, and she won't care about you ruining the wedding dress anymore." Fu Siheng's eyes coldly swept over the house where I live. His tone was cold. "You live in this house, right? Your parents left it to you, didn't they? You really don't know how to appreciate things. I heard that your uncle has been eyeing this house for a long time, but he has never been able to find out its exact location. If I let someone know the address of this house, do you think it will be taken away from you? By that time, will you have nowhere to live?" As I listened to my former lover speak to me in a threatening tone, I held back the tears in my eyes. I had no choice but to agree. "Okay, I'll deliver the porridge on time tomorrow." Early the next morning, I arrived at Han Wanwen's place on time. Han Wanwen opened the door. She was wearing only a transparent lace nightdress. The nightdress clearly showed the curves of her body, as well as the marks left on her body. The red marks were like countless silver needles. They pierced my heart deeply. Han Wanwen saw that I had turned pale. She smiled. deliberately pulled her collar a little. She walked proudly in front of me. Han Wanwen said coquettishly, "Cousin, thank you for cooking congee for me. Please pour the congee into a bowl and hand it to me." Han Wanwen spoke in a tone of commanding a servant. She saw me obediently hand her the bowl. Her eyes became even more pleased and arrogant. "Wow, the congee smells so good. I can't help it." She glanced at me secretly. She suddenly reached out and knocked the bowl of porridge over onto the floor. Then she pretended to be scared and shouted, "Ouch, that hurts. It really hurts." Fu Siheng came down from the second floor of the villa. He happened to hear Han Wanwen's shout. He quickly ran to Han Wanwen. Seeing Han Wanwen's red and swollen hands, Fu Siheng angrily shouted at me, "Kai Zia, how could you be so heartless? Wanwen has already given you the opportunity to apologize. Why did you have to hurt her?" Fu Siheng hugged Han Wanwen with pain in his heart. His eyes stared fiercely at me. The anger on his face seemed to be about to tear me apart the next second. I looked at his eyes in pain and asked, "If I said she hurt herself, would you believe it?" Suddenly, Fu Siheng's expression became hesitant. Han Wanwen noticed his change in emotions and deliberately raised her voice and said, "Siheng, she's really gone too far. Not only did he make me hurt, he also tried to destroy our relationship." She said with tears in her eyes, "Why did she do this to me?" Fu Siheng heard this. The hesitation on his face instantly disappeared. He stood up all of a sudden. He walked quickly to me. Then with a crack, he raised his hand and gave me a hard slap. I was already too weak. This slap knocked me to the ground directly. Immediately, a mouthful of blood spurted out. I looked up at Fu Siheng, who had an expressionless face. I felt like something inside me had broken. I made up my mind immediately. I stood up with all my strength. I stared at him coldly and said, "Fu Siheng, remember this slap. I will never forgive you in my life. This is the end between us." When Fu Siheng heard this, panic and anxiety immediately appeared on his face. He hurried over. He grabbed me and said anxiously, "Don't go." I struggled to get free of his hands. "Fu Siheng, don't you understand? Let go of me. We are breaking up." After leaving Han Wanwen's house, I staggered along the road. My weak body was almost hit by cars several times. The system really couldn't bear to watch any longer. It spoke up. "Host, I'll help you regain your strength. Hurry and go home safely." As soon as he finished speaking, a warmth spread throughout my body. My body, which had been on the verge of collapse, suddenly felt strong. When I arrived home, the warmth in my body had disappeared. I curled up in bed and lost consciousness. When I woke up again, it was already 2 days later. I looked at the palm of my hand. The number on it had become 3. At that moment, the voice of the system sounded in my head, "You've finally woken up. I was worried that you would die prematurely. During the 2 days you were unconscious. The invader did some strange things. The system told me, during my coma." Fu Siheng came to my house many times and knocked on the door, sincerely expressing his desire to talk to me face to face. Even though he had to deal with the details of the wedding, he would still show up at my doorstep after finishing all that. The system asked me carefully, "If the person who needs your forgiveness asks for it, will you forgive him?" I looked at the photo on the bedside table and tore it into pieces. I will never forgive him, even if he has lost his memory. I will never forgive him for his betrayal. As soon as I finished speaking, there was a knock at the door. The system said, "Host, the person knocking outside is still Fu Siheng. He has been coming at this time for the past 2 days. After I heard this, I wanted to ignore him and was about to turn around and go back to the bedroom. Suddenly, I heard Fu Siheng's voice outside. "Kai Zia, I know you're in there. Open the door quickly. I need to talk to you." He shouted outside the door for more than 40 minutes. The neighbors finally couldn't stand it anymore and opened the door to scold him. "Young man, for the past 2 days, you've been making so much noise that we old people can't get any rest. If you don't go, I'll call the police." At the urging of the neighbors, Fu Siheng finally left. I stood by the window watching his car speed away. That night, while casually browsing the trending topics, I happened to see a microblog post by celebrity Han Wanwen. The photo showed 2 clasped hands. I immediately recognized one of them as belonging to Fu Siheng. He had once given me warmth. Han Wanwen wrote under the photo, "Dear, I'm already looking forward to our future life together." She posted a photo of a kiss in the comment section. Fans left messages wishing her well. I stared at the enlarged photo on the screen of my phone. I sneered. I casually clicked like on that Weibo post. I had only just clicked like. It was less than 10 seconds. A strange number called. Before I could say anything, the other party directly confronted me. Kai Zia, did you deliberately click like on Han Wanwen's post? It wasn't enough that you scalded her before. Now you have to keep an eye on her every move. I replied coldly. Han Wanwen has so many followers. Why did she find out as soon as I liked her post? Is she always spying on me? As soon as I said this, the other person immediately choked up. My voice became a little colder. Fu Siheng, is this how you treat someone you think is important? Don't call me again. Fu Siheng's tone froze. Wait, let me explain. I hung up the phone in despair. In the last 2 days of my life, I felt my body growing weaker and weaker. I didn't even have the strength to pour myself a glass of water. I could only lie on the bed helplessly. Although the system had already eliminated the pain in my body, the sense of weakness throughout my body made me feel as if I were about to die. I was only accompanied by a lifeless system. When I woke up, the system would sing to me. When I was unconscious, it would secretly keep an eye on Fu Siheng and Han Wanwen. When I wake up, he tells me what happened in the past few days. For example, the day before yesterday, Fu Siheng and Han Wanwen went to take wedding photos together. Yesterday, they finalized the list of guests to be invited, and today, they are getting married. System tells me all this as idle gossip. It helps me pass the time. When I see me frown in pain, although it doesn't have human emotions, it will occasionally say immediately, "Host, this unreliable man is not worth your sadness. You won't find a 3-legged toad, but men with 2 legs are everywhere. You will definitely meet someone more suitable for you in the future." As soon as I finished speaking, the system suddenly fell silent. After a long while, it cautiously spoke. "Host, I'm sorry. I spoke out of turn just now," I said weakly. "It's fine. If it weren't for you, I would have been alone for the last part of the journey." The system's voice said with a slight tremor, "Host, you don't blame me." I smiled calmly and said, "Getting sick is my own business. It has nothing to do with you. On the contrary, because of your presence, you have given me hope. At least in the last moments of my life, I will not feel lonely. That's enough. Stop talking. I'm very tired. I want to sleep." As I drifted off into a daze, I heard the system's voice in my head again. "Host, I will not let you leave with your sorrow." I slept very deeply. It was very comfortable. I didn't even want to wake up. I wanted to keep sleeping. In my dream, I was wearing a wedding dress. I was Fu Seng's bride. He was holding flowers in his hands. His face was full of love. He walked towards me step by step. He held out his hands and held me tightly in his arms. Even through my clothes, I could feel the warmth of his body. He was so excited that tears were streaming down his face. They wet my wedding dress. It was as if he was silently promising to be with me forever. I was lost in a beautiful fantasy. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on the living room door. I opened the door dazedly. When I looked up, I saw Fu Siheng standing in front of me in his tuxedo. He had a red flower pinned to his suit pocket. I asked in surprise, "Why are you here? Isn't today the day you marry Han Wanwen?" Fu Siheng's eyes were red. He looked at me silently, without saying a word. Suddenly, he opened his arms, hugged me tightly. "Kai Zia, I remember everything. I'm sorry. I'm really terrible." Hearing the news that he had recovered his memory, I didn't feel a single emotion. I couldn't help but ask the system in my head, why did he suddenly remember the past? The system whispered like a child who had done something wrong. I spent half of my energy helping him regain his memory. I sighed helplessly in my heart. "Tell him about our agreement. I'm going to die soon, even if he remembers. It's useless. It's too late for everything." I calmly told Fu Siheng, "Let go of me, hurry back and get married." "No, I will never go back. You are the only one I love. Even if I remain single for the rest of my life, I will never marry another woman." Fu Siheng looked at me pleadingly. "Kai Zia, can you give me another chance? Let's start over." I looked down at the number in my hand, which had now returned to 0. I smiled bitterly and said, "Sorry, it's too late for anything now." As soon as I finished speaking, the 0 in my hand immediately turned into starlight. It disappeared in the blink of an eye. At the same time, I felt the vitality in my body being sucked out of me. Before I closed my eyes, the last thing I saw was the face of Fu Siheng, which was filled with extreme pain. When Fu Siheng took me to the hospital, my soul had already left my body. I floated above the emergency room, watching the doctors trying to restore my heartbeat with a pacemaker. This was the first time I viewed my body from this perspective. It felt very novel. What's going on? Why is it that patients are full of cancer cells? In this case, the patient should have already died. The doctors were surprised to have been able to resuscitate me for more than 10 minutes. But seeing my body with a stopped heart, They could only tell Fu Siheng the news that I had already died. Fu Siheng grabbed the doctor by the collar, unbelievingly asked, "How could she have died of cancer? She was just talking to me." The doctor said in surprise, "Mr. Fu, we can't find a reason for this either. Common sense would suggest the cancer cells in the patient's body had already spread throughout the body. It should have collapsed long ago." Fu Siheng simply did not believe the doctor's words. He pushed the person in front of him away and rushed into the resuscitation room. Holding me close, he felt my body gradually losing its temperature. "Kai Zia, wake up. Can you open your eyes? If you are willing to talk to me, I will listen to whatever you say." Fu Siheng's voice trembled with emotion. He pleaded, "Don't ignore me. I really can't live without you." The doctor came in. He said softly, "Please don't be sad. The person is already gone. Mr. Fu, please accept my condolences." Fu Siheng grabbed the nearby stool with one hand and threw it. "Get out, you doctors, all of you, get out." He picked me up with red eyes. He hurriedly walked out. "Kai Zia, I'll take you to a better doctor. You will definitely get better. Didn't we say we would go together until the end? You can't leave me behind." Fu Siheng pulled me, determined to leave, but he was stopped by his parents who had hurriedly arrived. Fu's father saw Fu Siheng like this. He said with both pain and helplessness, "Kai Zia is gone. Can you stop doing these useless things? Let her go in peace. In that case, why did you insist on leaving her in the first place?" Fu's father glanced back. The bodyguard immediately understood what he meant, immediately restrained Fu Siheng, pulled me out of his arms. Fu Siheng shouted while struggling, "You can't take her away. I can't leave her." As soon as Fu Siheng finished speaking, Fu's father raised his hand and slapped him. "Stop it. Let her leave in peace." When Fu Siheng heard this, his eyes suddenly became vacant. He collapsed to the ground, watching me leave. His eyes were full of despair. Afterwards, Fu's father took me to the best cemetery in the city and buried me there. Because I didn't have many friends or family when I was alive, only the Fu family showed up at the funeral. Fu Siheng was locked in his room by his father for several days. Finally, he was released. As soon as he saw my tombstone, he immediately knelt down, his forehead pressed against the photo on the tombstone. Crying, he shouted, "Kai Zia, I miss you so much. I really love you so much." The cold rain soaked him to the skin, but he refused to leave my grave. Until dawn, Fu Siheng fainted from exhaustion. The Fu family took him away. From that day on, Fu Siheng moved into the house where I had lived. He never went out again, nor did he go to the office to handle work. And for some reason, I became a spirit and was bound to him, unable to leave. The system told me, only when he completely lets go of me can I break the bond with him. He is now sitting drunk on the living room floor, staring at our old photos. His face is full of stubble. He no longer looks as handsome as he used to. I want to talk to him. I have tried several times, but it seems that he can't hear me. I have to give up. That day, he had just entered the door with a bottle of wine. The doorbell rang. Fu Siheng opened the door. He saw Han Wanwen standing outside the door. She was dressed up very nicely. She said, "Siheng, I'm here." Han Wanwen looked at Fu Siheng with deep affection in her eyes and said softly, "Siheng, come back with me, okay?" Fu Siheng coldly shook off her hand and said, "Han Wanwen, I don't want to see you. You'd better go by yourself." Han Wanwen quickly stopped him urgently. "Siheng, let's go together. I can't be separated from you." After saying that, she reached out to pull Fu Siheng again. Fu Siheng pushed hard, knocking her to the ground, angrily shouting, "Han Wanwen, don't you understand?" Han Wanwen clung tightly to Fu Siheng's leg, her voice full of tears. "Siheng, Kai Zia is no longer here, but I'm still here. I fell in love with you the first time I saw you. My feelings for you are no less than Kai Zia's. Siheng, I don't blame you for leaving the wedding that day. I'll wait for you to come back at any time." Fu Siheng's temper flared up even more when he heard this. Han Wanwen, stop it. He grabbed Han Wanwen's neck tightly. His eyes were red. "Kai Zia could have gotten better. If you hadn't gone to the hypnotist to change her memory, she wouldn't have left me. You caused her to die. You made me lose the person I love most." Fu Siheng squeezed Han Wanwen's neck hard. Han Wanwen's face turned red. She was about to suffocate. I wanted to stop him, but my hand went straight through Fu Siheng's arm. I was so anxious that I yelled, "Fu Siheng, let go. If you don't, you'll go to jail." Just as Han Wanwen was about to suffocate, several people in uniforms suddenly walked in through the open door. Seeing strangers appear, Fu Siheng let go of her hand. Han Wanwen finally caught her breath. She fell to the ground and breathed heavily. The men looked at Fu Siheng. Then they took out a piece of paper and walked up to Han Wanwen. They said, "Mtkes Han Wanwen, you are suspected of tax evasion and gambling with a crowd. You are now under arrest for investigation." Han Wanwen looked panicked, shaking her hands repeatedly. "No, I don't want to go." She clung to Fu Siheng's trouser leg, begging, "Siheng, save me." But Fu Siheng coldly broke her hand away. After Han Wanwen was taken away, several uniformed men remained in place. They looked serious as they said to Mr. Fu, "We just saw you suspected of intentional injury. Please come back with us for investigation." Fu Siheng turned his head and looked at the photo on the living room table. He said, "Okay." Not long after, the news that Han Wanwen had been taken away by the police was reported by all major media outlets. Some lesser-known actors and actresses also posted online, publicly accusing Han Wanwen of having used her status as a famous actress to bully them. She was also exposed as having deliberately injured them during filming. Soon, Han Wanwen's reputation hit rock bottom. Many fans unfollowed her. More and more people who had been hurt by her began to expose her publicly. Han Wanwen had completely turned into an object of hatred. Meanwhile, Fu Siheng, after being taken into custody by the police, started to refuse to eat or drink. He seemed to have lost his mind. He kept shouting my name. Within a few days, his health deteriorated. He became ill. He fell into a coma due to a high fever. He started to talk nonsense. The police saw that he was in a serious condition. They immediately took him to the hospital. While the doctor was resuscitating him, the sound of his rambling grew louder and louder. Suddenly, he became agitated. He was unconsciously struggling in bed. His hands and feet were flailing about. I leaned closer to hear what he was saying. Suddenly, a strange force pulled me into a whirlpool. I immediately fainted. When I woke up, I found that I had become extraordinarily small. My mouth was making squeaking sounds. I hurriedly called out to the system in panic. The system stammered, "Host, you have been reborn into another world. Your current parents are the ones who accidentally passed away in your previous life." I was both surprised and puzzled. I couldn't help but ask, why did I suddenly get reincarnated here? The system replied, "It was Fu Siheng who used his soul to exchange for your rebirth." I widened my eyes in surprise. I asked, what will happen to him? Would he also be reincarnated? I was about to ask again when the system's voice sounded again. "Host, being able to be reborn is a rare opportunity. Make the most of it." Hearing this, she felt a mixture of emotions. Tears could not be held back from the corners of her eyes. At that moment, the familiar and warm voice came to her ears. "My dear, why are you crying? Mommy is here with you, don't be afraid." From then on, I decided to forget the memories of my past life. I settled down to be with my parents. I grew up happily. However, as I grew up, I always felt that there was an eye watching me silently. Unlike my past life, I made a lot of good friends in this life. I would never walk alone on the street again. It was raining heavily that day. I had just bought an umbrella from the supermarket. I almost slipped in a puddle. Just then, someone behind me gently held me up. They also helped me straighten the umbrella in my hand, which had fallen over. I felt the warmth in my hand disappear. I froze for a moment. I pretended not to know anything. I quickly left the place. After I got home, I couldn't help but cry. I understood that he had just helped me. Since then, my life has been very smooth. When I grew up, I got into the university of my dreams. I also met the first boyfriend in my new life. This boyfriend was handsome and sunny. He was completely different from the steady and mature Fu Siheng from my previous life. I fell in love with him very quickly, like ordinary people. We got married after graduation. On our wedding day, many guests came to give us their blessings. They watched as we took our vows and exchanged rings. A gentle breeze blew. I, in my wedding dress, looked away unintentionally. It seemed as if I saw a figure in a suit holding flowers in his hands slowly approaching me. He handed me the flowers in his hands. He gave me a tight hug. Then he quickly let go of my hand. His eyes were full of lingering and deep feelings. "Kai Zia, you must live a good life in the future." I nodded my head vigorously to agree. Another breeze blew. His figure gradually turned into a speck of light and finally disappeared from sight. At this moment, the system that had been silent in my mind for a long time suddenly sounded. "Host, Fu Siheng has completely disappeared from this world." Hearing this sentence, my heart tightened. Tears flowed down my face without my realizing it. The groom standing next to me asked in confusion, "Kai Zia, what's wrong?" I looked at him with a complex expression in my eyes and said softly, Dear, we must be very happy in the future.